Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the P.A.S. Report Podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano, and I'm glad you could join me today. If you're not already a subscriber, subscribe and follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the PAS Report website, pasreport.com, but most importantly, share this episode with your family and friends and on social media because we have to inform people of what's going on. We need informed voters out there. This is a critical election year, and it never ceases to amaze me how the press will lie, deceive, and manipulate with such ease. They want to craft a narrative to push a particular political agenda. These people have gone so far off the rails, and over the last couple of decades, they don't even pretend to hide the fact that they're no longer journalists. They're no longer the fourth estate that once aimed to keep the government honest, hold the government accountable, inform the public about what's going on. Now they are nothing more than Democrat National Committee activists. They're ideological zealots, and they wouldn't know truth if it slapped them in the face. I've been watching the coverage ever since President Biden's State of the Union address. The amount of times they've compared President Biden to FDR, it would be hysterical if it wasn't so pathetic. Just listen to how they're fawning over President Biden's State of the Union address.
This was a feisty speech that at times felt more like a rowdy campaign event than a traditional State of the Union address.
I think he addressed this age issue with his aggressive, feisty, ad-lib delivery. I think that helped him.
Smoking Joe Biden was on fire during the State of the Union address. He was lit.
I thought that was a remarkable, fiery, powerful, vigorous guy.
What really, frankly, we were watching last night was the president, his command of the issues, his forcefulness in how he presented it all.
I thought he just completely blew away the Biden is too old issue last night.
It was his best speech of his presidency by far. Strongest speech. And most importantly, for people that were thinking, oh, he's too old, he's too this, he's too that. Man, he like I said, he gave a lot more than he got.
They're such jackals. And if they were being honest, if we're being honest, if we're going to tell the truth, it doesn't matter where you stand on the political spectrum. This president doesn't come close to an FDR, and I'm not the biggest fan of FDR. But this president isn't even Mr. Magoo. He's a rapidly deteriorating old man. That's what he is. And I'm not trying to be mean. It's what we see on the television screens. But they tell us that you should see how much energy President Biden has behind the scenes. He's in command of everything. He runs circles around his staff. This is what they want us to actually believe. And here's MSNBC's Joe Scarborough telling us that this is the best Biden ever. Take a listen.
Start your tape right now, because I'm about to tell you the truth. And F you if you can't handle the truth. This version of Biden, intellectually, analytically, is the best Biden ever. Not a close second. And I've known him for years. The Brzezinskis have known him for 50 years. If it weren't the truth, I wouldn't say it.
Come on, give me a break, man.
Best Biden ever. What a joke. Our eyes and ears aren't lying to us, even though that's what they want us to believe. They want us to believe that the problem really lies with us, not President Biden, that we're just too dumb and ignorant to understand how awesome President Biden is and how much he's done for America, even though our own lives, we're suffering. Our economic situations have become much more difficult. The world is much more unstable. Our infrastructure is collapsing. Our education system has already collapsed. But they want us to believe that President Biden's senility or dementia, it's really just part of a vast right-wing conspiracy, as if having 90% of the press serving as DNC activists isn't enough. They need all 100%. And watching the coverage after the State of the Union, it was actually mind-boggling because I don't know what people are talking about. Yeah, he got through the speech without collapsing or looking way too confused, that he doesn't even know where he is. Sure, he didn't completely butcher the speech, but the truth is that the speech was largely disjointed. The speechwriters did a terrible job crafting the speech. They should be fired. He started with Ukraine, where the number one and number two issues for most Americans is the economy and the border. He then started talking about Hitler and immediately referenced his predecessor. Basically, I always find it disgraceful when anyone makes Hitler references, but this is a State of the Union address, not the venue for this type of nonsense. And obviously, he was trying to compare the former president of the United States to Hitler. And he kept on repeating that history is watching. History is watching. I don't even know what the hell that means. But if we're actually going to look at the president's delivery, he stumbled and muttered throughout the speech. He was incoherent in a lot of different areas. And don't take my word for it. Just watch this speech yourself. Listen to it yourself. And read the transcript. But here's the thing. When you read the transcript, I searched dozens of news sites that published the transcript, and they all edited out the inaudible gaffes that the president made. You see some of the incoherence in the sentences, but they don't refer to the parts of the speech where he mumbles, and you cannot understand a single word he is saying. They go out of their way to protect him, even if it means that they destroy their own credibility in the process. They have zero integrity and they are slugs. It shows how little regard they have for you. And in this episode, I will break down the deception really going on. But more importantly, I want to explain the difference between a democracy versus a constitutional republic. I keep on hearing that this election and the way the president wants to frame it and the media is going to frame it is that this election is about democracy itself, that freedom is on the line, that the threats to democracy are so great and Trump is the next dictator. I'm taking Trump out of the equation. I'm not even paying attention to him. What I'm going to talk about is how we are not a democracy, no matter how many times they want to say it. That is not true. It was never the intent. We are a constitutional republic. The founders would never refer to us as a democracy. And I'm going to explain why the founders chose a constitutional republic, because there are specific reasons that they decided on a republic over a democracy. However, the left and bureaucrats can be extremely nefarious. They understand the importance of words and usage and changing language. So I'll explain it all when we get back from this quick break. So everyone hang tight. I'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. So I am going to get to the constitutional republic aspect in a minute, but first I want to talk a little bit about the lies, the deception that we heard. And I want to make clear, the problem does not lie with us. We see and hear him just fine, and that's the problem. Not for nothing, but how many of you would trust getting into a car with this president driving? How many of you would take that ride? So he can't operate a vehicle. And as Special Counsel Robert Hur testified this week before Congress, he was the one that investigated the Biden top secret documents case, the classified documents case, where he said that the president can't serve trial because he doesn't believe the president has the mental capacity to serve trial. He thinks the jury will look sympathetic because he doesn't remember anything, and therefore it's not worth prosecuting him. But yet he's still supposed to be the president of the United States, right? So you wouldn't trust getting in a vehicle with him. He's too senile that he can't even serve trial for the potential crimes that he may have committed. However, we're supposed to pretend that he is capable of running the free world. Doesn't make too much sense. And if you listen to the press, they want us to believe that he is doing an amazing job. If you're having trouble paying your bills, it's not because of Bidenomics. You're stupid if you think that. You're too stupid to realize how Bidenomics is helping you. Ignore the fact that you've been paying 40% more at the gas pump since he took office. Ignore the fact that the price of eggs has increased nearly 70% since he took office. Ignore the fact that food prices are up well over 20% since he took office. The basic necessities. You have the president that claimed in his speech that his speechwriters wrote. It's not like he wrote it himself, but he claimed that he reduced inflation. And his media acolytes, they keep pushing that. But that's an outright lie. That is not true. Inflation, especially when it comes to energy and food, two things that we cannot do without, is still extraordinarily high. And sure, inflation may be flat this year. It may have dropped. The rate of increase in inflation may have declined this year. But overall, inflation is still way up since he took office, and it shows no signs of going down. But that doesn't matter because the president is protected by the press, who will not call him out on his lies. He said he cut the deficit. This is another complete lie, and they're all frauds. We are spending more than we ever had, and our deficits continue to grow. That is indisputable. He just released a $7.7 trillion budget. That is insane. They try to manipulate everything, and the reason his administration gives about cutting the deficit is nonsensical. But the lemmings, they're going to buy into it anyway. That's the scary part. There's people that actually buy into this nonsense. See, what they're doing is they're taking the COVID money spent, and now that we're no longer printing and giving away money, he claims he cut the deficit. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Consider it this way, if you're looking at your own household budget. If I purchase a new home, I put a down payment of $50,000. I cannot claim the following year that it reduced my budget, my spending, by $50,000. However, that's exactly what the media and the administration want us to believe. They manipulate the facts to fit their narrative, but the reality remains unchanged. Inflation persists, deficits are swelling, and the truth is going to be obscured by them misleading the American public. On the international front, we're supposed to ignore that the world has grown far more dangerous and unstable under this president. We're supposed to ignore the disaster of the president's failed withdrawal from Afghanistan, which triggered much of the instability that we are witnessing today. But don't worry, because according to the ideological zealots in the media, President Biden is a mix of FDR, Churchill, Kennedy, George Washington, Ronald Reagan, and a deep thinker like Benjamin Franklin, all into one. He is the greatest president of the United States that gave the greatest State of the Union address the world has ever seen. That's what they're saying. These people are frauds, solely driven by ideology. But the worst part is how the media, they continue to fawn over President Biden making freedom a central part of his campaign. I keep reading headline after headline how the president is fighting for democracy. He's fighting for freedom. You have former top bureaucrats, the pundits, the political class, stating that democracy is on the ballot in 2024. They're preaching about freedom, preaching about democracy. Just as we learned, the entire January 6th committee suppressed exculpatory evidence, exculpatory information that actually vindicates some of the information, that actually vindicates people. Not only does it vindicate people, it shows that some of the people that did testify before the January 6th committee were actually lying, and they hid that information. How's that freedom for you? Under this administration, what have we seen? We've seen the FBI and DOJ deeming parents, traditional Catholics, and those who support the former president as potential domestic violent extremists. I mean, congratulations, parents and Trump supporters. You got your own threat tags out there. They used the Southern Poverty Law Center to declare any group or person who dares to dissent from their narrow-minded point of view as a hate group. And the government uses the SPLC as a basis to open investigations. And all you have to do is look at the Richmond memo, the Catholic memo that the FBI put out. That wasn't just relegated to Richmond. It was taking place in 3 different states. And I warned in June of 2021 that the government would use outside groups to do their bidding when the Biden administration issued their national strategy for countering domestic terrorism. I warned about it then. Just go listen to the episode, June of 2021. I warned that they would use these organizations to target political groups. And it won't stop at organizations, that they were also going to use American corporations. And look, we see that they have worked with banks to flag purchases of ordinary Americans without any warrants. We know that purchases at Bass Pro Shops and Dick's Sporting Goods were flagged. I assume they think only Trump supporters shop at these stores. That's the liberal elitist mindset, is that it's only those rednecks that would shop at those types of stores. They don't realize that tons of Democrats and independents and libertarians and people that aren't affiliated at all with politics shop at these stores, but they don't care because they're so narrow-minded, they're so elitist. They punish and target whistleblowers like Kyle Seraphin, Steve Friend, Garrett O'Boyle. And the punishments that they inflict on them are not only petty, but they're designed to destroy their lives, and they're designed to warn other employees that if they dare speak out against the abuses, the FBI will destroy your livelihood. It's meant to have a chilling effect and silence and prevent others from coming out and speaking out against these abuses. They make a mockery of our Second Amendment, the freedom of press, when they target and arrest journalists like Steve Baker on misdemeanor charges that usually require a desk appearance, yet they had to cuff him and do a perp walk with him because they wanted to send a message. They flag social media posts, pressure tech giants to silence millions of Americans. This is what the Freedom Campaign looks like amongst Democrats. You have bureaucrats like Carol Crawford of the CDC who declares, quote, unapproved opinions must be scrubbed from social media, as if some government bureaucrat gets to deem what opinions I can have and which ones I can't. You have Jen Easterly, the director of CISA, who believes that the government should control cognitive functions, essentially the way we think. She wants to classify it as cognitive infrastructure, and she wants to do it in an attempt to control what we can say, see, and hear, ultimately leading to the ability to control our thoughts and opinions. As I explained last week, they are using lawfare against political opponents, and the most obvious example is the former president of the United States. Whether you love him or hate him, everyone should be concerned with how our legal system has been weaponized to target someone that they don't like, to target someone they disagree with, to target someone that just because they have TDS, that they have a Trump derangement syndrome, that they believe that they can make a mockery of our entire system, use it and weaponize it in order to destroy someone. At the State of the Union, the president openly threatened the Supreme Court of the United States. How's that for the Freedom Campaign? And you could see, it was actually really interesting to watch, because you could see Justice Kagan, a liberal justice, one of the left-wing justices on the court. She was thoroughly repulsed by his comments. Just look at her face. Many Democrats, many of the political pundits on television, many of our former officials, they called for nearly half of America to be re-educated, purged, or deprogrammed. You have Hillary Clinton has openly called for a formal deprogramming, essentially putting the government in charge of this deprogram. Does that sound like freedom to you, or does that sound like Orwell's dystopia in 1984? But they're running the Freedom Campaign. They're fighting for the survival of democracy, the self-anointed guardians of democracy, because we cannot forget that when it comes to freedom, this president openly threatened those who didn't want to comply with totalitarian vaccine decrees, stating how he and his administration's patience was wearing thin. How's that for freedom? That you have the leader of the country, the president of the United States, openly threatening the American people. Their version of freedom is extraordinarily warped. Their definition of freedom is not liberty. It's not the ability to exercise our liberties, our free will responsibly in accord with the dictates of right, reason, and natural law. Their definition of freedom is submission. They coerce individuals to acquiesce to their agenda. They want you to surrender personal liberties to grant the government greater power and control over every facet of our lives, and they do it all under the guise of freedom. Scarily, people are all too willing to give them that power. Their version of freedom is that you only get to exercise the limited liberties the elites selectively permit. This is why they scream threats to democracy. What they really mean is threats to their own power and control. They manipulate language, they twist facts, they suppress dissent to maintain their grip on authority. That's what they do it for. And that's why they've been willing to interfere in the last 3 presidential election cycles in order to push this even more. Now, true liberty cannot flourish in the environment that we are currently in. True liberty cannot flourish where dissent is punished, voices are silenced, and power is concentrated in just the hands of the few. That's authoritarianism, and we have to remain vigilant. We have to question authority, defend our fundamental liberties against those who seek to erode them under the false pretense of protecting democracy. This is precisely why our founding fathers decided on a constitutional republic instead of a democracy. And I'm going to explain that when we get back from this quick break, so hang tight. Welcome back, everyone. So let's talk about constitutional republic versus democracy. In episode 464, I raised the question, what is a dictatorship and is America headed toward one? It was actually a really good episode. I encourage you to check it out if you haven't listened to it already. But in that episode, I explained how people, particularly on the left and within the media, but also government bureaucrats, because they're wordsmiths, understand they're very good at using language. They understand the importance of language, how they are seeking to redefine words and their meanings. And I explain how this is a subtle yet effective strategy to control not only the narrative, but the parameters of debate. What is it deemed acceptable debate in our public discourse? Just look at how much it used to be pro-life versus pro-choice. Then they changed the parameters of the debate. Now you're arguing about post-birth abortions, partial birth abortion. It's insane. But getting to democracy, and that key word that they keep on using, ask yourself, if the concept of democracy is so great, why did the Founding Fathers choose a constitutional republic over a democracy? What did they see that so many people today are missing? Why did they view democracy as a threat? See, democracy is where the will of the people prevails. It's about the will of the people. Now, just think about how many times we constantly hear about the will of the people, these amorphous people that they never define. In a democracy, people either vote issue by issue and the majority rules, so long as 51.1% of the people believe one way on an issue, they're going to prevail. In other forms, people are going to go out and vote, and this leads to what can be deemed and was deemed by the Founding Fathers as the tyranny of the majority. Our founders recognized that majorities in and of themselves can be tyrannical and impose their will on those in the minority. They crush opposition. They silence those who dissent. Our founders also understood that ultimately a direct democracy leads to dictatorship. See, it's impossible to have people vote on every single issue. You can't do that. So in direct democracies, there has to be a mechanism in place where the government can respond quickly in the event of some type of emergency. And what happens in a direct democracy is people ultimately vote by majority for a strong figure to lead that country and grant that leader extraordinary power and authority, where the democracy ultimately dies in dictatorship. And there are specific reasons that the Founding Fathers chose a constitutional republic over a democracy. One, because they believed that a constitutional republic is a much better safeguard against tyranny and is better at promoting individual liberty. See, democracy does not promote liberty. Understand that. Democracy does not promote freedom. Democracy promotes the will of the majority. Constitutional republic, individual liberty is the premise behind a constitutional republic. However, for the last 50 years, some have been subtly subverting our constitutional republic to transform it into a democracy. And this has been going on for decades. I can make a really good case that it really started with the 17th Amendment, where we took the power of electing senators away from state legislative bodies and put it in the hands of the people, then making the senators beholden to the people, beholden to the mob that our Founding Fathers didn't want. But what's really going on is there are many out there that want to blur the lines. They want to make people believe that a constitutional republic and a democracy are the same thing. And I can tell you from personal experience, every single semester on the first day of class, when I give my students the citizenship exam, one of the questions is, what type of government does the United States have? And the overwhelming majority will write in democracy. There are very few students, there are some, but there are very few that actually write either republic or constitutional republic or democratic republic. So the push has worked. We now have people thoughtlessly regurgitating this idea of democracy. They have muddled the real meaning of the principles of American government and the intent of the Founding Fathers. Our founders understood the threat that a true democracy posed. Our founders wanted to prevent the tyranny of the majority. And it is why they institutionalized safeguards by creating a separation of powers and a system of checks and balances. It is why the system is intentionally designed to be slow and awkward, complex and inefficient. They institutionalized conflict at every level, and they wanted to protect the system from itself, protect the system from the people, and at the same time protect the people from themselves and the people from the system. They got it. In a democracy, the tyranny of the majority will always prevail. In a constitutional republic, representatives have to practice what we call statesmanship. Unfortunately, there's not too many officials that have statesmanship anymore. But what is statesmanship? Well, it's where officials have to temper the expectations of the majority and the minority. The idea of the will of the people in the United States is a myth. Always has been, always will be. And while it is important to take the will of the people into consideration, people could make some really, really bad decisions. People will be all too willing to empower government. Didn't we learn anything during the coronavirus? How many lemmings just blindly obeyed the decrees without asking any questions, without pushing back at all? Well, they're just trying to protect us. It's a pandemic. And how many lemmings would be willing to do the same thing the next go around? How many lemmings would look to government to reimpose these restrictions and take it even further the next time there's a pandemic? Frightening, isn't it? Because it should frighten each and every one of you. Our founders understood this well, and they warned about what democracy really means and why it was necessary to protect our country against democracy. And we see it. We see it in their letters. We see it in the Federalist Papers. We see it during the debates that took place at the Constitutional Convention. This is why it's so important to get people to understand real American history, understand our founding, actually read the original documents, not just a textbook that glosses over things, doesn't explain things, leaves tons of things out, but actually go back to the Founding Fathers' works and read those works yourself. Read the primary source documents yourself. You're plenty capable of reading these documents and formulating your own opinions. Some of them are a little bit more difficult to read than others, I grant you that. But gaining a true and thorough understanding of our founding is what can protect the constitutional republic, allow the constitutional republic to prevail, and avoid this idea of democracy. At the Constitutional Convention, you had Edmund Randolph stating that the general object of the convention was to produce a cure for the evils under which the United States labored, that in tracing these evils to their origins, every man had found in it the turbulence and follies of democracy. You had Elbridge Gerry and Roger Sherman. They wanted a system that prevented the evils we experience flow from an excess of democracy, meaning that in a democracy, people would willingly grant the majority and the government more and more power. And once they do that, it's only a matter of time before despotism reigns supreme. You have Alexander Hamilton, who said we are forming a Republican government. Real liberty is not found in the extremes of democracy. If we incline too much to democracy, we shall soon shoot into a monarchy. John Adams said democracy will envy all, contend with all, and endeavor to pull down all. And when by chance it happens to get the upper hand for a short time, democracy will be revengeful, bloody, and cruel. He also said that democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There was never a democracy yet that did not commit suicide. And that's exactly what we're doing today as they subtly replace the constitutional republic with this idea of a democracy. And George Washington summed it up perfectly when he wrote to Lafayette stating his concern of democracy. And in the letter he wrote, "It is one of the evils of democratical governments that the people, not always seeing and frequently misled, must often feel before they can act right, but then evil of this nature seldom fail to work their own cure." Now, paraphrasing that quote, what Washington meant and what he believed was that democracy led people to make bad emotional decisions, that decisions were based on emotion as opposed to reason and logic. Doesn't that sum up everything today? Hasn't every single political debate today been about emotion? Everyone's injecting their emotions into things as opposed to rational thought? That it's all about feelings as opposed to reason, logic, and common sense? It really sums it up perfectly. And that's why we need to make it clear to everyone that we are a constitutional republic. We are not a democracy. That the people in power currently, they're the ones that represent the threat to the republic. There's no threat to democracy. They represent a threat to the republic because they want to do whatever it takes to destroy the republic and remake the United States whatever way they see fit, empowering themselves. They're not going to give up power. It's like Hochul sending National Guard to the New York City subways, right? They were the ones that actually created the problem. Now they're saying, empower us further. We're going to deploy military assets because of all the crimes that are happening on the subway system that they directly caused, rather than just stop being stupid and actually follow the law and prosecute criminals. So be wary of just granting this blind power to the government. Be wary of just spouting off this idea of democracy. Understand where it all ends and tell others about it. Share this episode with your family and friends and on social media. Now, if you found this episode informative, please leave the P.A.S. report a 5-star rating. Take 30 seconds to write a review on any podcast platform that allows it. I got a great guest coming in on Monday, so I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back on Monday with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.